Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Crushing Comics, where we are continuing our epic X-Men reread. Myself and my good friends and fellow mutants, Tyler and Fariha. Now, usually we read a lot of Uncanny X-Men issues. It's kind of the point. We're starting with Claremont, but there are some other issues that are going to fit into our reading today, because Uncanny X-Men 111 starts out with a really peculiar situation. It starts out with Beast and the X-Men nowhere to be found. So we're going to read the issues that kind of lead us into that and explain who shows up during and especially at the end of that issue. We are going to spoil everything that we're reading today. We're probably going to treat anything in the history of Marvel as fair game. So if you're the kind of person who wants to remain unspoiled on all sorts of former Marvel plots, this is not necessarily the place for you. And because of the nature of the seismic changes of the current run of X-Men, we do make some comments about the status quo that follows Jonathan Hickman's House of X and Powers of X. We're not going to explicitly spoil any story beats that come after that, but we're going to talk about the general status quo. So if you have not read House of X and Powers of X, we're not going to spoil every plot beat, but we might be talking about some of the changes that it caused. Mm-hmm. With that all out of the way, the first story I think to read in this group is probably Captain America Annual 4, which actually is really interesting because it's from the period of Captain America that was exclusively written and drawn by Jack Kirby. And this sees Kirby returning to one of his original Silver Age creations, Magneto. And we don't get to see a lot of Magneto written by a lot of other people other than Claremont at this point. And we certainly don't get to see him written by Kirby. So it's a really kind of throwbacky, interesting Magneto story, which I think, Tyler, you've read relatively recently, even before this read, or had you read it knowing we were going to get it in this read?
No, I read it because what was I doing? Oh, because I was trying to go through the year by year reading and of like Claremont's writing, because I did not know he wrote so many other things apart outside of Uncanny X-Men. So I was reading certain things. I can't remember what. I think it might be. I was flipping through the omnibus, and then I saw this footnote that say, "Oh, see Captain America Annual 4." So I just jumped over to Marvel Unlimited, and I brought it up and started reading it. I said reading it with quotes because I couldn't get past the first quarter of it. So in the end, really? I ended up just swiping it through, looking at the pictures, and swiping it through, looking at pictures.
It's
and
so funny. You really disliked it that much?
No, I mean that's a problem. Well, that's a problem with me because I could not take Silver Age comics. Like I really cannot, tolerate, that was the word I was thinking, because I keep thinking of the Singaporean slang which says I really cannot tahan it. I cannot tolerate it. So like I couldn't get past Uncanny X-Men #1, which is drawn by Stan Lee and written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. I couldn't get past Spider-Man #1. I couldn't get past Fantastic Four #1. Like it just doesn't sit well with me at all.
It's interesting because I definitely have trouble with the kind of like overwritten nature of those sometimes. And also the characters tend to be very plain. Like they aren't multi-dimensional plotting, very human characters. Not always. Sometimes they can be, not to paint all of the Silver Age with a broad brush. And this Magneto is definitely a very rather one-dimensional Magneto. And the layers that are there are so funny. Like the whole premise, which is ridiculous, is that he and Captain America have both answered a want ad from the newspaper about needing a caretaker for a mutant, which I have so many questions. Like, does Magneto, I guess we could like retcon it that Magneto just has like a word search for mutant out there because he's trying to like rebuild his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And so he saw mutant in the newspaper and he went, except Magneto doesn't have a Brotherhood of Evil Mutants at all in Claremont's X-Men. And he's just been kind of like brought back from babyhood in Uncanny X-Men 104. And this has to fit before he appears later in this episode at Uncanny X-Men 111. So this is Kirby being like, meanwhile, after he had that fight with the X-Men on Muir Isle, he decided to reassemble a Brotherhood of Evil Mutants who we never hear anything of again other than Peepers. And he also found a tiny spaceship, and he has no idea about how to see inside of the tiny spaceship, but he's really interested in it. So he's actually explicitly looking for a really tiny mutant. And as luck would have it, he finds a really tiny mutant on the other end of this one ad. I mean, it's just got this like Silver Age, this kind of like unpeeling the onion caliber of every ridiculous thing leads to an even more ridiculous thing. Free, did you read this issue, or are you just taking our word for it?
I'm taking your word for it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I ended up reading, I think, Annual 3 or something, and it didn't have
no mutants in that
it.
one.
And I'm like, why am I reading this? I thought that in grand scheme of thing, it will come together. And then when you guys said that Annual 4, I'm like, oh no, mistakes were made. So, I mean, no, but you said an interesting thing because you said the word search. How does he have word search in that era?
Like, well, I said retcon. Or Peepers saw somebody reading the newspaper. So this introduces Peepers, who's a mutant who can see almost infinitely far, but only with his eyes. But as long as he's got a straight line, he can see it. And also, he's also Cyclops. Like, he also can shoot beams out of his eyes that are incredibly deadly. Almost enough to vaporize Captain America, but darn it, not quite.
Yeah. Missed it.
But I mean, there's
I'm gonna
ridiculous.
Go back and read it now.
It's truly
so
ridiculous. So this mutant that they find from the other side of the one ad, it's actually one mutant in two bodies. It's a tiny little baby, tiny mutant that could fit inside of a wristwatch, but he can barely even move his tiny little baby bird mutant body. And then there's this big hulking stone golem kind of mutant that he telepathically inhabits that moves around. So you just get it's just ridiculous. Like Cap goes on a jog with the giant mutant who's being controlled by the little mutant, but then Magneto kidnaps the little mutant. I mean, it's just a truly ridiculous. If you miss that level of ridiculousness, here it is.
So do you know what's the name of the little mutant?
They just call him Mutant One.
Okay, because the only reason I asked, because Brian K. Vaughan's Mystique run, there is a tiny mutant who helps Mystique. Professor X settles her with this mutant, and then it's like, oh, she's gonna be your assistant. And apparently Professor X has done something, so he doesn't actually vaporize because he can't control his size. And that's how he kind of maintains like.
Oh no, that's different. That I know who you mean now. That's not this guy.
Okay, so it's not that one. Okay, good. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's the origin of this guy.
Yes, I'm referring to my Captain America official index to the Marvel Universe, and it says, spoilers, Mr. 1 and Mr. 2, mutant with two telepathically connected bodies, both die. So at the time of the release of this in like 2007 or 8, they had never been used again. Could be on Krakoa now, no one knows.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay. Well, that was ridiculous.
It was truly ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we have a few more things to cover.
Yes.
So
less ridiculous
than that. So even though Marvel Team Up 69 and also 70 is kind of next, I think we have to talk about the backup story in Classic X-Men 17 first, because in Marvel Team Up, the X-Men are not at the mansion. And this Classic X-Men 17 issue, which is the issue that does reprint Uncanny X-Men 111, which we will get to, explains how the X-Men wind up not at the mansion. Now, Freya, did you read this one?
I did read this one.
Okay, so why don't you lead us off here? What do you think about this story of Mesmero and his enrapturing of Jean Grey, which leads him to control the entire X-Men team?
So, I mean, as I was reading this, I'm like, Peter and Tyler is trying to kill me with the bad tropes that women have been settled with. Like, and it's in storytelling. Like, this is another one. This is like, Jessica Jonesifying of
very Jessica
Jean
Jones.
Grey.
Yeah,
Jean Grey.
But Jessica Jones came later.
I know, but it's just...
No, I know. It came later.
Yeah.
It's that same plot. It's the same plot that female characters been settled with, like, again and again. And it was very upsetting. It's very upsetting and disappointing, because the thing is that Jean Grey is supposed to have all this. Like, she's a phoenix at this point, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it fits here.
Yeah,
so
she is
Phoenix. Later, she's not even Jean Grey. She's just Phoenix.
Yeah, she's not. Yeah, she's just Phoenix. So it's like she has all this power, but then somehow there's two different aspects. That when a woman gets all this power, she has to learn to control it. But when a male character gets it, it's a learn to use it. So there's a two different aspect that female character always gets settled with, and I'm really sick and tired of that. Everyone keep telling that to her, and she's like, oh, I'm so weak and I don't know what to do. And then the thing is, like, this guy gets her, and then she's put in that weird clothing, which kind of leads to like a rape situation. And then he's like, oh no, you know what? I'm going to take you to the X Mansion. And then apparently she giddily said all the things about, like, gave all the information. And she was supposed to be this powerful character. And here we are. Who is it written by? Because I don't want to say if it's...
Yeah.
Because it's Claremont fixing his own issue.
Yeah, and then I was actually thinking that, I'm like, I thought he was supposed to be better than this. He's not. It's not good. Ugh.
Yeah, there's a level of commentary here which is very strange. And I'm happy that we have a woman on the show to speak to it, so it's not Tyler and I speaking to it, which is Claremont almost saying with the story, like, and these kinds of male characters, and by extension men in the real world, will manipulate and control women to get what they want. And even if you're the Phoenix, the only thing that it can prevent is maybe you can have your body, but you're still going to be controlled. Like, your mind is going to be controlled. Your actions are not going to be yours. And so in a way, there's almost like a positive sheen on it, because he's like, oh, look, he can't physically abuse Jean. And when he tries to physically abuse her, she takes over. But then there's the whole rest of the implication of that, which is that, oh, but this woman's mind is so easily controlled by man, and her life is so easily controlled by man, as long as he doesn't try to, violate her body. It's just really disturbing. And it's, Claremont has some flaws, which we will encounter repeatedly. And the way he writes about consent, even when he starts to understand that it's a theme that he's actually dealing with, it ain't great.
Yeah, and I think it's like at the end of this, like, it's like the way both the female character, her and Storm, was put in this ridiculous costume. And I think, like, well, the equal opportunity Colossus was also put in a ridiculous costume with, like, this whole thing. And then it's just like, I mean, I don't know. I was just like, well, isn't she supposed to be this, like, really powerful character? I don't see Superman stories where Superman has to control his power, learn to control his power. He's always have to, like, oh, how do I use my power for good? Why can't Jean have that story? Like, I was just tired of that. I was like, oh, another trope.
In a way, I think, in this case, I think he's just trying to say that, like, Jean, is I mean, it's not new, because I think he has written, I can't remember whether is it a retcon, I'm not retcon, whether it was written after or before, but it's like, he has always written the fact that Jean, not him, I think. Okay, so this is what happened. Jean powers manifested when, she was in the mind of her friend who was killed. And in order to protect her mind from, really, for her really losing her mind, they built in mental blocks so that she has no telepathy, or very weak telepathy initially. So I think this works in that vein, because when she gets the powers of Phoenix, she has to relearn to control her powers, because they are so much more than what she was used to, right? So, and I think Claremont has always written, like, telepathy as not just like, oh, I can read people's mind, also the fact that strong thoughts can invade your mind. So here Jean is trying to protect herself by shutting everything down, so, like, by turning the volume or the power level down. And that is when Mesmero sort of hypnotize her. I do agree about the part about, her being dressed up and things like that. But that part is really more a comment on Mesmero than Jean, right? Because Jean wasn't in control of herself at the time.
No, and I know that, but I'm talking about why are female characters always put in these situations? Like, write something different. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, why this threat to their, their bodily autonomy is always a story point. That's
Okay.
And I think because I've already seen that happening with Jessica Jones, I already seen that with Captain Marvel, I've already seen that with Jennifer Walters. It's a Marvel problem.
But it did happen. It did happen with Hellions too, right? Because Hellion was trying in Academy X. He was trying to. His powers got expanded, and then he was trying to train. Beast was trying to train him to control his power, to fine tune his power, because he could.
Right, but the thing is, he rejected that, right?
Because it's also in a school book. Like, I don't think we can count. I don't think we can count somebody training their power in a school book, which is like ostensibly the point of that. Every time a woman gets some kind of crazy cosmic power, they're like, oh, I'm vaporizing everyone. I can't control myself. The romance of it is overtaking me. I think if there's one character that they're doing well with that, in recent Marvel comics is Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers. Like, she's had a really big power up. And while she doesn't always know the full extent of her powers, I don't think they tend to write her a lot and they're like, I've almost overwhelmed myself. Like, if anything, she goes too hard and she's like, well, I guess I can do that, which is nice because that's kind of the way that a lot of male characters are written. Like, they get that I didn't know my own strength beat a lot more than women get. Women frequently get the I almost killed everyone with, it's like it's just the same coin, but it's the weak side of it. And it's just, I mean, not to like really harp on this, but because it's a classic X-Men story, but I want to, because I think Claremont always likes to toy with this idea of consent, right? It's threaded through his whole run. There's constant body switching, mind control. It's just one of his themes. But I do think that he realizes after a while that always having it be a man control a woman is not it, right? That's not worth exploring. It's got things that he shouldn't comment on. And so then you get things like Emma Frost, taking over Storm's body. Then you get things like Spiral remaking people's body, which is where I am in my personal reread right now. And it's like, even though it's still gross and it's about consent, it allows him to write different parts of this other than just a man controlling a woman, which is all too common, which is why this issue bothers me so much. Because I know he's trying to like fix his story from 111 to be like, how could Mesmero control all of the X-Men so permanently and all at once? But he's writing this in 1987 when he's in the middle of all that mutant massacre, Fall of the Mutants type stuff. He's a better writer. And I just don't know. This issue really bothers me for similar reasons to Fariha.
And and then why not use like someone like, I don't know, like Colossus maybe, or like Nightcrawler maybe, like, someone who probably necessarily doesn't have them, like, all these other like mental power to kind of do that. I mean, this is one of the reasons I keep on like, because I know that there's something about Jean Grey, because I know that she's your favorite character, Peter. And that's why I kept on wanting to give her chances after chances. But the thing is, the way she's written so far, and even like in like modern runs and everything, I mean, she's pretty much absent for most of it. It's like, it's this like, she's a personified of women wanting to do something more, but then always being held back.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you cannot control your power. And it bothers me so much. And I know that Claremont can write better because there is Storm, on the other hand, who doesn't necessarily have to deal with all of this. So it's like, so why are you doing this? So it's just like, it's not good. But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe that's the whole point of like, having like a spectrum of things. I don't know. But it's just when it's like a 2 data points, it's kind of hard to see it as that way.
Well, for better or worse, and it seems like we're mostly on the side of worse, if you want to understand why the X-Men are where they are at the beginning of issue 111, you should read the backup from Classic X-Men 17. But before we can get to Uncanny X-Men 111, we still have one more thing to read, which is Marvel Team Up 69. Now, Claremont and Byrne were the creators behind Marvel Team Up at this point. And even though Marvel Team Up, if you did not know, pretty much means Spider-Man Team Up, occasionally it means Human Torch Team Up. But in the original 1972 version of it, it's pretty much Spider-Man Team Up. And he's hot off of just a couple of issues ago meeting Captain Britain for the first time, which lets us kind of place Captain Britain at the in the same period as these X-Men issues. But here we actually open up not on Spider-Man, but on Lorna Dane Polaris and Alex Summers Havok on Muir Island, after they've done all the cleanup that resulted from Uncanny X-Men 104, and they're trying to enjoy a romantic night together, but unfortunately the Living Pharaoh's goons have some other plans for Havok. And that is why this fits here, because it kind of shows the state of Muir Island and a lot of other things happening in the X-Men's world, again, to set us up for issue 111. So Tyler, what do you think of this Claremont Byrne jam on Havok and Spider-Man? Not really teaming up. I don't know if we could call it a team up. It's just Havok and Spider-Man.
I mean, my first thought is, okay, wait, before I jump into this team up, I have one last comment about the classic backup story, the Mesmero one. Nothing to do with Jean. It's more to do with Wolverine.
Oh, that's true. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, because Wolverine basically faked out Mesmero at the end, where he's like, oh, he realized that, oh, Mesmero has this hypnosis power, so I'm just going to play it. And he pretend to be hypnotized before attacking him again. And I'm like, see, even this Wolverine, like at this point in time, is not stupid. And my main problem with the current Wolverine is that he's often acting stupid. So why? Anyway, that's just my pet peeve.
At least he's not raping right now.
No, so I know.
You lose some, you win some.
Okay. Anyway, back to the team up. I feel like this should have been like, Uncanny X-Men 110. Like it shouldn't be in the team up issue. Like it has. I mean, it features Havok pretty prominently. Well, in the beginning, and teaming up with Spider-Man loosely later on. But the main villain here is also a mutant. So it could easily have gone into like 110, and it also establishes why it establishes the appearance of Beast in 111.
Right, because it has this sequence of like Alex thinks Lorna is dead because the goons throw her into the ocean, but she's fine. She's Lorna Dane. She's okay. Yep. So she tries calling the X-Men and nobody's picking up. And so she winds up reaching out to Beast to be like, it's awfully strange that nobody's at the mansion right now. Yeah. And there's the answering service kind of isn't even on, which leads Beast to then take a Quinjet, which Thor is very puzzled by, which then leads Beast into Uncanny X-Men 111. But meanwhile, Thor winds up assisting Spider-Man in resolving this living Pharaoh plot in the next issue of Marvel Teen Up. And the thing with Marvel Living Pharaoh is that his power and Alex's power are connected such that neither one of them can be truly at the peak of their power while both are alive. And Living Pharaoh would prefer to be the living monolith that can use the full extent of this power. And so he wants to absorb it all from Havok. Much later, this is retconned as being perpetrated by, spoilers, Mr. Sinister, but we have no concept of that at this point. It's just something we know from the Silver Age. And so Pharaoh is just always trying to get Havok and do something. So eat him, I don't know. And so in this case, he just wants to keep him in this glass coffin that will always be absorbing his power. So he's not going to kill him, but he's going to make sure that he gets the full brunt of the powers all the time. Havok gets a couple cool moments. He shows his ability to think on his feet and in danger here in a way that we haven't really seen yet, I don't think, which is cool. And that's part of why I like this issue.
Yeah. I mean, there's one other thing is like Claremont has this euphemism of sex, as like he writes the two of them, like Havok and Lorna, on the beach talking about discovering who they are and how much they mean to each other, like overnight because they didn't sleep. So I was like, oh, okay, are they having sex? And he couldn't say it.
I mean, he uses almost that same formulation in the classic Jean and Scott in the Desert, which we'll come to not too long from now.
Fariha, what do you think? I mean, you were never on board with like Alex. You think Alex is really boring. What do you think?
Yeah, how did he come across to you here?
I didn't read this issue, unfortunately. So because the thing is, when I read 111, I'm like, oh, the story's told. I don't need to read this. Because the story, it's like, Beast actually tells what he was. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's why. So because I didn't actually have time before this, so I couldn't read that. But now I'm going to go back and read it. I mean, Alex is probably continued to be.
This issue is actually collected in the omnibus.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because it's by Claremont
so
and Byrne.
is
It has
actually-
X-Men characters. Like, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. You know, Peter wrote that as optional. So I didn't.
Well, it is.
But
I mean, it is optional.
Peter also write classic as an optional, but
Yeah.
I still read them. So I should have read them.
It's
I mean,
actually
the other-
also in the first Claremontian epic collection as well.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, it actually makes sense though, because or else if you're going from 110 to 111, you're like, huh? Like,
Yeah.
you know, but then within 111, everything is actually explained. I'm
Correct.
like, well, there you go. You know, Marvel could write tie-in before.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
They
but
don't know how
the
to
other
do it anymore.
I mean, the other thing I thought you would enjoy here is that you know, like how Polaris called Beast for help because Havok was kidnapped, and then Beast just went off and looked for the X-Men, ignoring the fact that Havok is still missing and kidnapped.
Oh yeah, he's like, Havoc, great, that's nice, and he's like, well, I better find the X-Men.
Yeah,
He's
I was like, and I was just
See,
waiting.
even Beast doesn't care about Havok.
Exactly. I was just waiting for you to say that. That's why I'm asking you. It's like, oh, Fariha, what do you think?
Damn! I should have
Because-
read that. This is the start of, like, you know, evil Beast. Like we've been
Yeah.
talking about dark Beast. This is the start of it. It's like Havok, don't care. Let's look for the better one.
No, but this is not the high intelligence, low wisdom beast. This is just like forgetful
Regular
beast.
beast.
It's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to look for. Oh wait, X-Men. Oh yeah, I'm look for the X-Men.
and
Yeah,
that's
okay, well,
that's what leads us finally into Uncanny X-Men 111, because it famously starts with Beast at a carnival, and you're like, what? And he's looking for the X-Men, and he's like gotten some pings on his thing. He's gotten some leads, and he's here at this carnival, and all of the X-Men are the various carnival attractions here. Now we don't know at the time, if we're just doing a sequential X-Men read, that they've been removed from the mansion and they're under Mesmero's control. Here we would just be finding that out cold. And this issue is kind of Beast trying to figure out what is the weak spot in trying to break through the control. Who can he shake free first to
But first
infiltrate and get them out?
But first, he spends a lot of time figuring out if these are the real X-Men, because
Yep.
it's like, well, I don't know if these are real X-Men. I have never met them.
Yeah.
I don't know about this.
I mean, the one
And
time
then, you know,
he
the-
Right, because he's
appeared-
only really heard of these new X-Men.
Yeah, I mean, the one time he was like,
right.
I think in issue 90, was it 94? Where he appears on the
Yeah.
screen and said that, oh, you know, we need help because the Avengers were not around or something.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, I
Yeah.
guess these are the new X-Men.
yeah.
No, I mean, no, someone said that these are the new ones. It's like, oh, if you say so. Like, that was his reaction. I still remember that his reaction was, oh, okay, if you say so. But yeah, so he never even noticed them or cared about them enough to get to know what they look like. So he was just passing by each attraction. It's like, well, I guess it could be Storm. It could be Nightcrawler.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I shouldn't be, into this. So, and then finally he goes to Jean, find Jean. It's like, maybe you are Jean.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
The way you float down to the ground.
Yeah. maybe you are Jean. I'm like, isn't he supposed to be smart? What's going on here? So, it was all very funny.
I mean, what about starting the story in the middle, like of something happening, right? You're being thrown into a story that is already on its way. It's already happening, and you don't know what happened before,
So I made the mistake or not mistake of reading 17 before this. So I now wish
Okay.
I didn't. I wish
Yeah.
I just read everything in one go and then kind of see how it felt. But because now I knew what was going on, right?
Mhm.
So to me, it read completely different than what you
Ah.
were saying,
Okay.
which is a kind of like a loss in a way,
Yeah.
because it shouldn't have been read that way.
Whereas I have read it many times just coming into it cold before I kind of put my whole reading order together.
Yeah.
And it's really disorienting, especially because you come right off of that Dark Hawk or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Steel Hawk, Hawk Steel fill in 110.
Yeah.
Warhawk.
It was a really
And And so you're kind of like, is this the result of that? Did he leave something behind in the mansion that, you know, and I think Claremont, you know, to his potential credit, maybe was aware at the time that he was coming off of this weird fill-in issue. And he's like, well, rather than try to pick up from there, let's just like really throw everybody into mid-story. And what I enjoy about this in Media Res is that it doesn't ever really go back to explain it. Like he goes back to explain it eventually in that classic X-Men backup, but it's kind of just let to happen. And this is all just a setup and a prelude for what happens at the end of the issue. Although we still have a little while before we get there, that sets up the next story. So it's kind of just like the whole purpose of the story was Claremont just wanted to get the X-Men into a small space that could be flown through the air. And he kind of just was working back from there. Like, how can I get all the X-Men? What would work? A covered wagon? That would work. Why would all the X-Men be in a covered wagon? They could be at a circus. Why would all the X-Men be at a circus? And I can just see his wheels turning until he's like, well, I don't really need to explain why they're at a circus. As long as Mesmero got them there, that's good enough. And so that's where we start the issue.
But I kind of like the fact that, I mean, starting in the middle of an action is going to be something that Claremont does quite often. And in some cases, I think it does not work at all because it really, really confuses everyone. But in this case, I think it kind of works because the reader goes along with Beast and try to discover what is happening. So as Beast discovers something, the reader discovers something too. So
right, because you would already know if he had started it with like the actual kidnapping, you would be like, no, listen to Beast. But here you actually have some level of mystery of like, is it the Phoenix doing this? Like you don't really know. And especially because Jean is just like, she's in this like green robe trench coat with these fishnet stockings and she's like smoking a cigarette. It's just like such a weird moment for Jean. You know, and you get almost having read that classic X-Men backup, you get the sense that Mesmero is like, well, if I can't have her, I'm gonna really just have her be this like weird dame from like a gumshoe story from the 40s, you know, just like let's have her off to the side and have her not be desirable since I'm not allowed to have her.
And then also Cyclops is like, he's like just a security, he's not even an attraction.
No, he's not. He has no attraction.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude, you're like the most like, you know, normal passing mutant out there. Stop crying about your eye laser beam.
And so Beast is unable really to do anything about any of this. He can't snap Jean out of it. He can't snap Cyclops out of it. So he continues his investigation. And in a panel that has been seared into my brain, he discovers Mesmero in his covered wagon, just drawn like one of Burns' French girls. I mean, he's in full seduction mode. I think we could describe it as crotch first. It's disturbingly sexual.
I mean, I was actually kind of thinking, I'm like, what was he doing there sitting like this? Like, well, was he waiting for someone? What's going on? What was the... I had the same exact reaction. I'm like, whoa, what is going on?
He's practicing a pose for Jeff Goldblum.
I mean, it's something. Yeah. You just can't help but look right between his legs the way that the panel is framed. It's hypnotizing, which I guess is part of his power. So Beast encounters him there. And then we cut away to Wolverine, who, independent of any of Beast's interference, is breaking free of this control, lining up with what we saw from the classic X-Men issue, which is that Mesmero was having a hard time controlling Wolverine to begin with. But since we didn't have that classic story at the time, you can already see this is like Burns' influence. He's like, Wolverine wouldn't just be mind controlled. Wolverine's cooler than that. Wolverine's got force of will. And Claremont's like, yes, keep talking. I got it. And it's just, it already feels like a different Wolverine. It really feels like we're reading this Wolverine for the first time and he's a brand new character. I don't know. Is it just me? I always feel that when I get to this page, when he breaks out and he cuts his bonds and he starts to hunt down Mesmero and we'll get to him and Jean in a second. It just feels like a completely different Wolverine that I've just been introduced to for the first time.
But wasn't it like a similar Wolverine in another issue we have seen where he was the first one to break through? I feel like we have seen it, like, you know, when they're
under Lang's control and the I don't know. This is different though, because it's like specifically brainwashing. And I think it hints to this idea that there's like more to Wolverine than meets the eye. And he's got all of these mental layers that like it's really hard to convince him to be someone else, which is, I think, why it's different to me than just like being locked in a chamber or whatever, you know?
Okay, possibly.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I think you definitely happened before.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I wasn't super in, like, this was just a moment for me because I thought that he already have demonstrated that before.
And I think also, the other thing also, I think it's more like the change in focus because it's Byrne, and Byrne loves, because he's Canadian and therefore he has attachment to Wolverine. You do get to see a more focused Wolverine issue, as opposed to when Cockrum was drawing it, Wolverine and Banshee would often be tossed off panel. Yeah, and then it's like, oh yeah, they flew off and they got captured. Yeah, we are not talking, we're not drawing it. I'm not drawing it. That kind of thing. So so you do see a shift in focus. I mean, unfortunately for Banshee, he doesn't get much.
Yeah, he kind of becomes the odd man out because neither Claremont nor Byrne seem to care all that much about Banshee. Should have just let Mora drown him last issue or two issues ago. So now we unfortunately, Wolverine is like, well, I better snap Jean out of it first. Good instinct. But to get Jean to snap out of it, he, again, weird Claremont themes that will come up again, decides that he'll just smack her. And that, physically assaulting her will kind of bring her to her senses, which it does. But it reads in such a bad way now. I don't know. Fariha, like, how hard did you cringe?
A lot. A lot. It's like, and then knowing that what he's going to do to this woman later on, that how I think it's the same in the movie and in the comic, right? Like, he actually, he stabs her, right? To get her out of the...
I couldn't possibly spoil that for you, Fariha.
Yeah, okay, we are not spoiling it for you.
You can go ahead and you can think that.
But the thing is, so it's like knowing everything. And another thing is like, why can't you... He's just like, because same trope, when it happens to men, you're just gonna hit them in the head. Why not hit her in the head?
Right, that's the thing. It's not that I'm saying, like, don't just punch her. Like, I'm not saying don't threaten Jean, but just the image of him being like, well, I've got to fight a woman. I guess I'm just going to, like, backhand her. But also, and we're not experts in late 1970s fiction culture, is like, would it have actually come off worse at the time to see him punch her? Like, now we read it and we're like, oh, that's so insulting that he backhands a woman. Like, what a regressive moment. But at the time, could Claremont have gotten away with him punching her in the gut, or would it have been like angry readers writing in being like, how dare you have a man punch a woman in the gut? Like, I don't really know.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying just hit her in the head, like, in the back, like, just drop an anvil on her. That's better, because it's like, that's like equal opportunity. Everyone gets a anvil dropped on them. Just do that. Like, rather than like this imagery of, like, domestic violence and everything.
I know, right. That's why.
When you combine in the whole history of it, it's not a good.
But the thing is, why go there? Right, like
and that too.
Because Cyclops is there, so why doesn't Wolverine just try and attack Cyclops and punch him in front of Jean to try and snap her out of it?
Right, it seems like there's so many other beats here, which is either put Jean at mortal danger, like literally try to drop an anvil on her and be like, I'm sure she'll try to evade that, or Wolverine doesn't even like Cyclops. Why not be like, well, I'll murder her guy and maybe that'll snap out of it, and if not, fine. Like, what that would, I don't know. So it just seems like,
just avoid it, right? Like, just avoid it.
Just do something different. Exactly.
It does lead us though to a great visual moment of her kind of manifesting her Phoenix power and her gold costume, and then being like, remembering everything that's happened, which leads her, to free all the other X-Men, which we don't know why it would be so easy here, but we do, because it's the classic X-Men issue. And they kind of corner Mesmero, and we don't even get the satisfaction of them beating up Mesmero, because around from the back of the desk turns Magneto, who has taken this time of the X-Men at their weakest moment to get them all into a covered wagon so he can fly them to Antarctica.
Well, I mean, Fariha, what are your thoughts?
So when I first saw that, I'm like, wait, this was his big plan? I thought this was his plan. Like, I haven't read 112 and 113 yet, which we're going to talk about later. I'm like, this is the plan? So I was like fuming. I was like Peter reading a Jonathan Hickman X-Men issue. That's what I was. I'm like, what? I mean, how dare they? But then, it kind of, so yeah, I did not see that coming though, because I was like, whoa, like, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
But it actually has a very satisfying ending.
And Byrne's Magneto he's large.
I know.
I mean,
and
he's got
sexy.
Yeah. Look at that arm.
I mean, since he lost, he returned from his babyhood, he's been exercising.
His
a lot.
prime.
Now
He's supposed to be in his prime.
That's what he keeps on saying again and again. I'm like, okay, I get it. You're in your prime.
No, I mean,
you sexy beast.
I mean, if we talk about the arts here, right? Like, there is this panel where Magneto appears, and Mesmero was like, "Oh my god!" And you think he's reacting to Beast, right? But if you look closely at that panel, there's a shadow of Magneto's on Beast's back, which I have never noticed before. So until this reread, if you go to that page, it's
that's
at the
really
bottom
interesting.
left.
It's like while Mesmero is like trying to hypnotize Beast, and Beast is like, "You're not going to do it," and then finally he faces down Mesmero, and you can see there's a shadow from behind Beast approaching, and it's clearly Magneto. It's got his little helmet twines.
Yeah. That's the thing, right?
Ooh.
Like, you can see that. I mean, these are like visual cues which Byrne puts in, and there's a really famous one later on, which I'm not going to spoil it for you first. I'll let you see if you can catch it. But Byrne does this quite a bit. And then just before the last page, he squeezes 7 X-Men into one 9 by 9 panel, like small panel, and does it beautifully. I mean, I thought that's the brilliance of Byrne, I think. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Yeah. It's the bottom corner of the final page right before the big full body Magneto reveal. Right. And just, I mean, Byrne was good. I try not to let my appreciation of his art at the time get reflected by the stories he's created since then, the person he's become today, because at the time, this was revolutionary. I mean, he draws them with such authority and power. He really kind of discovers who they are. Claremont, you can never take away that Cockrum, in working with Claremont, defined all of these looks and created them, and all of these beautiful costumes and everything. But when it comes to just the way they carry themselves, the way their faces look to me, Byrne defined that just as much as Jim Lee. Like, I think Byrne and Lee are two of the most definitive artists on X-Men. And I just always really delight in reading these issues because you see Byrne doing things for the first time, and it really sears into your brain what some of these characters look like. And then when you go back and read Cockrum, you notice like how bug-eyed they look in Cockrum, or how weird their faces are shaped, or how long their noses are. Because in your mind, your mental image of them will come to be the Byrne version. At least mine is. Yeah.
I was just going to say, this got seared into my brain. Look at that. Look at those arms.
He's massive. He's like bigger than Colossus.
Pride Magneto.
Well, the classic X-Men issue does make some alterations to this, but really the only thing it does is gives us a recap at the beginning to orient us to the fact that Beast has history with the X-Men, which this issue hadn't really done. And you have to think, for audiences at the time who had not been reading the Silver Age, they really don't have a lot to go on other than the fact that he's a mutant. So the classic X-Men issue gives you more, but quite a cliffhanger here, and it goes to some places in the next issue. So if you want to stick with our read, we're just charging right forward. The next few issues of more than a few issues of Uncanny X-Men have no chance really for a break in them, so there's not a lot of other things that are inserted around them. Next time we will read Uncanny X-Men 112 and 113, as well as the classic X-Men issues that go alongside them, and it's a pretty huge story that leads to a whole run of really huge X-Men stories.
It's hits after hits after hits.
Yeah, we're coming, Fariha, if you've been hanging on by your fingernails to like try to maintain your interest, if we cannot get you interested in X-Men over the course of the next 10 issues, then maybe this read is doomed. Because I think here's where it starts getting good.
It's not doomed. I can tell you that, because 112 and 113 is the first time I'm like, oh, now I see what those guys are talking about.
Yes.
Because all this time I was kind of fuming. I'm like, why are they making me read this? Even though we know X-Men is better when it's read together, we are always talking about that. But I was like, oh, make it stop. But now,
I want to dig into that.
113.
I want to dig into that for a second, because when people say, where should I start reading X-Men? The answer of many internet nerds such as ourselves, they'll say, just start with Claremont. Or worse, just start with Silver Age, but let's not tackle that. And so this first epic, which is a lot of what people would be told to go by, has the issues Giant Size X-Men #1, X-Men 94 to 110. My argument is, if you just have somebody read Uncanny X-Men 94 to 110 and it's all in one book and they have the option to stop reading X-Men and not read the next book, I think they would stop. I really don't think 94 to 110 is all that compelling, other than as a prelude to what's going to start happening starting from 112. That is my position as one of your foremost X-Men experts on the internet, which is, do not tell your poor friends to start reading Claremont from scratch unless you're going to give them hour-long coaching sessions on every issue and why it's going to matter more to them later, as we have with Fariha. I don't know, Tyler, what do you think? And then background of Fariha is the one who's been subjected to this.
No, I mean, I completely agree, because someone will come in and say, hey, I'm new to comics, or I'm new to X-Men. Where should I start? And I often oppose the recommendation to start from the beginning, even though I do suggest it. Sometimes I would say that, well, if you really do not know the characters, you have never read any X-Men, let's start with the greatest hits. Let's start with Dark Phoenix Saga. If you want to read a longer type of story, if you want to read really short story, go for God Loves Man Kill. Goes for Days of Future Past, and things like that. Like, go for shorter stories that kind of encapsulate what Claremont X-Men is, and then you start from the beginning of his run. Yeah, because then you know that, okay, this is where he's going to get to eventually, and even exceed it. But if you come in cold and, like, if Fariha has just read Sandman and the next thing is like, oh, I want to do some superheroes, I was like, oh yeah, go ahead, Giant Size X-Men #1 and Uncanny X-Men 94, you'll be like, okay, superheroes is not for me. I think that will be the conclusion that you get, right?
Well, this is Tyler and I theorizing, but Fariha, you've now just been through it. You've read a fair amount of X-Men. You've read Whedon, you've read Morrison, you've been reading all the Hickman. Yeah. But, like, would you recommend to anybody now yourself as a burgeoning X-Men fan to start from 94 the way that you've done here? Unless, of course, they're reading along with us in this series.
Yeah. So it's very... I mean, so the thing is, like, I kind of keep on saying that I necessarily don't think that, I feel like Claremont is kind of the way, and I can change my mind later on, but as it stands right now, it feels like so much has happened since then. And these stories, it's like similar to me telling you what I've done in my middle school. Like, it's just like so much has gone on with these characters and so much has changed between them that it's just very difficult to go back and even think about those stories. And I have a kind of feeling that if I didn't know Hoxpox, Stocks, Rocks, would I have been as interested in this, because recontextualizing Moira and how those are, would it have actually mattered to me as much? I do say, though, you should read Giant Size X-Men, X-Men 94, and jump to 111 and onwards. And also those classics X-Men backup stories are so much better, except for the couple that we talked about are not necessarily, but the earlier ones, it helps to understand some of those things. But the thing is, I don't know, maybe when I read the whole thing, it would make different sense, that it would probably be like, no, I needed to read all of this so I can get here.
Yeah, my position on it always has been, and of course, I had never read all of these sequentially until being an adult, because unless you were like Tyler and you got them all in Classic X-Men, they were impossible to lay your hands on in the 90s. I mean, not impossible, you could get them, but they were like already in the expensive. I don't know, $20 to $50 an issue range if you were going earlier than Dark Phoenix Saga, and they weren't collected really anywhere. And so when I finally got to read it, I'd read so much other X-Men that I already had this kind of mindset of I was going back to unearth something, and you can kind of see the layers of Claremont figuring things out. But it's 16 long issues, and it's the better part of an omnibus. And I'm not saying they're bad comics, and especially if you're somebody who's going back and reading a lot of Bronze Age comics from 1975, I don't know that there's a lot of Marvel comics that are better than this. I'm just saying it doesn't really start feeling like the X-Men we know until this point. But to address one other thing that Fariha said, and then I guess we'll start to wrap up here, is Fariha, you made this comment that these things feel like they've happened so long ago. I think what you'll discover is that after we get to the Phoenix Saga and what's past it, if we keep reading past it, now we start getting to plots that get referred to constantly. Like the Claremont plots from 129 to like almost to the end of his run at 280 are things that almost every modern story refers to again and again. It's really just this early stuff that's kind of been left to the dusty corners of memory. So whether it's Dark Phoenix, Days of Future Past, The Brood, Emma killing Firestar's horse, these are things that we go on and remember fondly to this day. So that's what's part of the fun of doing this.
I know.
Classic
and I mean,
read.
Claremont himself tried to break that what do you call it? That really sad and angsty part of things by moving them to somewhere else, but it didn't quite work out the way he wanted as well. So, but we'll come to that hopefully. Yeah. I mean, when we get there.
Well, those are very many
saying.
ticklers for the future. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like we'll see how this all around goes, and then I'll maybe change my position once I'm done reading all of this.
So the next 20 issues is really important for you to see if you want to carry on.
Well, with all of that discussed, and with the reminder that X-Men really is better when it's read together, we will leave you there and tell you to prepare for our next discussion by reading Uncanny X-Men 112 and 113, as well as their classic X-Men mates, which are classic X-Men 17 and 18. And we will be back with you then. Or actually not 17 and 18, 18 and 19. So until then, and on behalf of Fariha and Tyler and myself, thank you so much for making this better by reading it together with us. And we will see you once again here on Crushing Comics.
Bye.
Bye.